My name is Daniel Grønbek. I'm from Copenhagen, Denmark. I'll be talking English to you today. So I work for a company called Pentera, but personally I want to say I appreciated, first of all, watching the presentation from Fortinet, which was my employer 10 years ago when I was country manager in Denmark. So nice to see how the evolution is coming around. We're here to talk about security, real security, security by testing, safe by design, how to automate security, and things like that. To start with, Pentera is the market leader within automated security validation, automated penetration testing in the realms of that. So we are taking the customers on the journey from the manual effort that you guys are probably used to by ordering a penetration test once a year, maybe twice a year, getting a red team exercise. It's costly, it takes time, planning, execution. There can be different, let's say, reporting, stability, and so forth. Whereas Pentera is a technology platform implemented in your environment to run continuous validation and testing in the environment, live and safe. So the digital transformation from the manual process to the digital. Let's start with the good news. It's 28 degrees outside. So by a survey, our CISOs in the market are saying, you guys have more security budget. Yay! How many can consent to that? By hands. More security budget, less, flat, so and so. Okay, so it's how you say in Swedish, it's lagom. Okay, but at least our survey is saying more budget is available. However, the spending is growing, so just about $200 billion spent in cybersecurity back in 22, so assuming 200 maybe last year. Yet, losses due to breaches, $7.4 trillion. And the gap is probably growing, I would assume. So how do we keep up? How do we catch up? My previous employer, CEO, I remember, he was talking to me one day and said, Daniel, I was just out with a customer. And I said, are you guys crushing it? Are you guys really crushing it? So are you battling the adversaries? No, we're not. Can't keep up. So there's a challenge in the market, and I don't have the silver bullet. I don't think Pentera has a silver bullet, but we have one thing that helps on the path of getting better visibility, more security. Another data point, IBM just released their data breach report 24. And this leads into one of the strengths and one of the areas that Pentera is really strong in. Stolen and compromised credentials, business email compromises, zero-day vulnerabilities, cloud misconfigurations. These are all averages in terms of cost per breach from the starting point. Where does the starting point of that particular breach, where does it come from? Where does it origin from? Email compromise, stolen identities, leaked identities. If you've got the keys to the kingdom, why bother making something difficult, right? So identities is key. So for just below $5 million in average data cost of a breach with these different techniques here is basically what you guys are looking into. And you see how big of a proportion of the different input, let's say starting points, that this is we're talking about. And obviously data loss and so forth, the service disruption, breakdown, ransomware attacks, extortion, double extortion. These are the costs that is affected by it. A bit of data points. How often are you adding or subtracting resources on your network, which basically means the acceptance that our network is changing on a daily or maybe a weekly or monthly, quarterly basis? The answers are the majority has at least quarterly changes in the environment. So network is dynamic, fair to say. But only 40% of them are testing it as often as the changes are happening. So are you sure that when you're doing a change in your environment that it's validated so it doesn't open up for something new? No. by statistic, you're not. Secondly, interesting question, what do you use with a validation report, which is a pen test report as of today? What do you use it for? Share it with executives, submit to board directors, transfer to IT security for prioritization. Yeah, that's an obvious one. Share with customers, share with regulators, archive, use it as a paperweight. So something is compliant driven, something is operational driven, and something is written, being sent to board, which makes sense. When I showed this slide the last time to an audience of 15, 20 CISOs, I asked, how valuable is that report to you? They said, well, we have to redo it a bit because our board doesn't understand the language. Makes sense? So what if we could provide reports that the board actually understands? So non-technical language. So why is penetration testing not something that is being conducted on a weekly or even a daily basis? Well, of course, cost is an issue. Availability to those scarce resources that we have today. Afraid of risk to business continuity, because the offensive part about testing is also a disruptive action, unless it's managed safely. So there's some hindrance to this factor, but most of the CISOs are actually interested in already have it or will invest into it, having offensive technology or processes in the environment as a continuous testing tool. So the interest is there, the trend is there, because we know by more validation, more testing, means that we can be more secure, and we know about what kind of risk that we really have in our environment. And I'll get to that we believe, and I'll get to that we assume that we have control over our risk, but we don't. The reason is, let's take it on the right side first. When we prioritize our remediation work, and the remediation work is there's a vulnerability on a particular system that has to be patched, it has to be updated. It could be that our Windows administrator has some sort of misconfigurations on the platform that he needs to change because it's opening up for sniffing capabilities, it's broadcasting hashes, it's broadcasting credentials in the environment, all sorts of things. So 34% of our answered CISOs, they are actually doing by business impact analysis. So looking at every threat, looking at every vulnerability, and making a qualified guess on how it impacts their business. And by that, they prioritize their remediation work. But the vast majority are using a CVSS score. You guys are probably aware of a CVSS score from a vulnerability management tool that is scanning everything, knows everything, and also saying, this is a hot thing, this is a hot thing, this is a hot thing. Probably 60% of all findings actually are hot, which means that it's quite a big job of patching everything. Vendor scoring, I love that because I used to work at Rapid7 and say, hey, this is really, really, really important because there's a malware kit and something can exploit it, and you don't need to be a very savvy adversary to actually exploit this particular vulnerability. But if that vulnerability right there has a wall in front of it, no one can touch it. So therefore, it's not a priority, or should not be a priority. If the door is actually open over here, because there are leak credentials, that is the keys to the kingdom. Spend time here, not there. But still, the risk, so the vendor risk model is still a big challenge, but it's also the one that actually is mostly consumable out there. So we want to change this, so the number of 34% that has this built in as a more context-driven analysis becomes higher. So the traditional mindset, a vulnerability is something I can patch. Unfortunately, no. Back in the old days, there were something called a vulnerability and a CVE, and then we have the solution to it. But today, it's not like that. A lot of vulnerabilities or weaknesses are dynamic. It's people-driven. It's because we are who we are, and we challenge the IT and security on a daily basis. You know, from the kids It's really difficult to put boundaries on them because they always find ways out. So it's with employees, same. So we need to change our vulnerability and risk-centric approach. More data, love it. It's a growing thing, it's a growing pain point. The number of vulnerabilities that are identified every year is going to cross 30,000 new vulnerabilities this year. 20,000, 26,000, 29,000, and it's just going to grow. So the pain point of having an operation model that continuously are scanning, getting data from the tools that are available, both for surface, what you're exposing on the internet, but also all your infrastructure products like basically the laptop, the operating system, the applications, a server level, the Fortinet Wi-Fi, and what have you. Everything has to be looked after. That's a growing pain point. And operationally, it's a nightmare. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, the environment looks different every single day. New things are happening. Additional hosts are in the network. Are they configured correctly? Were they actually provisioned with the right EDR or with a different configuration for that particular person that works in HR one day and sales the next day and so forth? That adds its complexity. New cyber threat, so there's a new hot potato out there. There's a new attacker TTP, or a way to actually abuse something in the environment. This company is a hybrid company, so they have adopted cloud. Amazing, gives us agility. But it's a new instance. Has it been configured correctly? Is it a misconfiguration? Has the DevOps man that was really speedy and really awesome forgot that he left his identity in an S3 bucket? Policy changes happens continuously. When we do POVs, as we call it, it's a one day, by the way, we get this every single time. We thought we fixed that back last year. Yes, but it can still be abused, it can still be used. So your risk kind of appetite, which is kind of in this level, let's just say example, is deviating so much that you actually don't know where your risk is in terms of your appetite. Thanks. Challenge number three, ineffective remediations. So this goes back to the non-patchable attack surface, because 50% of our vulnerabilities that we can identify is great. We can patch it, we can update it if possible. Or we can at least isolate it or put a firewall in between or whatever it is, segmentate it. But misconfigurations, the privileges of users, do we have control over that? Human errors. If there's a misconfiguration in the environment, which there quite often is due to, let's say, deadly default settings in Microsoft, we are super fond of them, by the way. I do a lookup, URL something, HTTPS, or it could be a remote session because I need to do something on a different server or laptop or whatever. I misspell. Suddenly, something is in the environment that can actually capture my credentials or hashes. Do I have a cracking engine? I can crack that password or hash, and then suddenly I am impersonated, and then I have access to something. Maybe I have privilege rights, so I can actually access crown jewels. So it doesn't take a lot by the human error, so the attackers can actually take that advantage and use it to their advantage, of course. Leak credentials, dark web data, and then data hygiene. Fourth, I'll promise I stop here. Credentials, identities is key right now. 24 billion leaked credentials in circulations. 67% of people reuse their credentials. Reuse? No, I don't reuse my password. Do you guys?
Yes, we did.
No. We are great at finding a new structure, a new way, new numbers, new kids' names, new summer, new after fall. No, we're not. We put a dot or we put a hyphen or we change just a little bit. That's why we're human, right? In a POV not so long time ago, we cracked 13,000 passwords out of 17,000 in 1.5 hours. That's how bad it is sometimes. 60% of breaches involve the compromise of credentials. And you see here kind of the spread suddenly happening, that the use of stolen credentials versus exploiting vulnerabilities. So this was the old way of hacking. This is a new way, because it's easier. We're leaving it too easy out there. So we need to validate our security. As an attacker, we need to have something that simulates the same as being an adversary in the environment in order to close the gap, as we started out talking about. We're investing, but we don't really close the gap. So here's our view. We need to change things, and being an attacker in the environment is the way forward as we believe it. The 4 pillars: think in graphs, automate, validate, and test continuously. Think in graphs. What is that? When you're a defender, like I assume you guys will be representing the companies where you have a SecOp team that will be looking at lists. That is represented by the vulnerability data, the detection data, the external surface scanning data. All sorts of data is being sent to you guys or to your security admins in lists, which means they use their 2 eyes and looking at, okay, I wonder where to start with. Okay, but the vendor says I have to start with this one, so I probably need to start with that one. So the manual effort here is the issue here, because they need to build this, let's say, as a routine and do things manually by their own way of doing it. Attackers think in graphs. What does that mean? The graphs is a vector, which is, okay, so, but if I can do this, I probably can do that. And the combination with the X and the Y means that I can do something really devastating. But you'll never get to that if you start by just consuming lists. So if we can present a technology that actually represents the same vector positioning, means that companies will be in better shape to understand root cause and impact. Automate. The challenge here, defenders use manual validation, which is you guys. You are calling and saying, hey, someone, come here and pen test me, please, next week. We have available slot maybe in 6 weeks, and then reporting has to be done, and da-da-da-da-da. It's very cumbersome. Use automated attacks instead. And reason why? The attackers are doing it. Initial recon, initial compromise, establish foothold. So they're actually in your environment, you don't know. Escalated privileges, so they have some rights as a user. Move laterally in the environment, maintain their persistence, and complete their mission of whatever that is. Data exfiltration, ransomware, extortion, things like that. Everything is automated by on their end, so you should be doing the same. Yes. Pentera engine works in this way here, automated validation. So without doing it, let's say, extremely technical, because I have a kawaii on, so I'm not technical. So we do sniffing, as an attacker would do, find those hashes and do password cracking. Someone might know the hash and so forth. We can run relay attacks, plant malware in your environment safely. So test that we can actually put malware in on devices without your EDR seeing it, or at least validate that it does see it. Extract data, move laterally, see if your network detection response would be picking up on lateral movements. Pivoting to different segments, elevating rights, and potentially also starting a ransomware campaign. Sounds dangerous, but it's safe, because it's built safe. We have more than 1,000 customers with how many complaints? I hope you'll say 0, please, but close to at least. Validate everything. So validate in depth to match your defense in depth, because you obviously believe that you have defense in depth on all levels. EDR, NDR, firewall, user protection, isolation, and all sorts of things. It should be validated that it is so. It's not common to actually do so and be sure that everything is architecturally set up correctly at all places, at all instances, at all factories, and so forth, because it just requires one gap, one place where the attacker comes in, and your history. Test continuously. By every sprint, by every change, or every week, or every month, do your testing, do your, let's say, validation, because only by validating and by securing you, you will increase your security posture and become safer. That's my message of today.